Dan Mahar, but I am sick to death of shoveling the snow. For our American friends, about 8 inches. For those of us north of the border, 20 centimeters or so. And for our friends listening in the Philippines, yeah, I'm talking to you, Brian. It's the stuff you don't miss, and we hate you for not having every year. Okay. Dansky, how's your back today? Because I'm a little worn out from all the shoveling.
Yeah, 2 rounds last night, another round and a half. I'll call it today. I'm done. I think we've got a couple days, and there's another one coming. So yeah, it has been a hard winter compared to last year.
A guy stopped as I was finishing the driveway as he was driving by and said, "We're Canadians. We never give up." And I said, if I had a white flag, I would be waving it right now. And I was tempted to do a little bit last night, but got home from the game in St. Catharines about 1 o'clock in the morning after a pretty brutal drive home. And I thought, how would the neighbors feel if I start scraping at the sidewalk now? So left it all until today. And as you can see, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, I am dressed in the gear of the team that I wish was playing in the Super Bowl on this Super Bowl Sunday as we record. If you're not watching on the YouTube channel, just take my word for it. I look great today. Simple as that.
Sure, Farwell. We'll go with that. Yeah,
Okay, we're going to go with that.
yeah. I'm
We're off
taking
to
the
a great
Steelers.
start.
Oh, I'll take the Steelers today too.
Attaboy.
Yeah.
All right, we both got the Steelers in the big game. Hey, because this will come out after the game has been completed, who you got?
I'm not sure I have a strong feeling either way, but I'm going to run with KC just because I know they're going to get that call when they need it, right?
You're not suggesting there's some kind of KC bias going on, are you?
I'm just saying, once fool me once. What's that saying? I'll go with that.
Okay, you go with that.
Yeah.
I'm also going with KC just because I wouldn't mind seeing something that's never happened in the history of the Super Bowl before. So let's see if somebody can win 3 straight. So, as I said, we record this before the game is played. By the time it comes out, you can send emails and make fun of us. OHL podcast at Rogers.com or tag us on X. Dan is at his name, at Dan Mahar. I am at Farwell _ OHL, but enough of the idle chit chat. There is a story, and it's a big story. Dare I say it's the story in the league this week, and it's not even the story of the game on the ice. It's what happened behind the scenes, away from the game, but it's the one that everybody is talking about. Dan, what do you have to say about the London Knights banning access to media before the game against the Kitchener Rangers earlier this week?
It's ridiculous to me. I saw a lot on social media this week, and a lot of both sides in this issue. Oh, why are people picking on Cowan and his streak, and leave him alone and let this go, and everyone should act like adults. Fine. All a member of the media or two did was take a very public streak and question a scoring play if it maybe ended the streak. That's all that happened. To ban the media in your own building, violate the OHL media policy. A lot of adjectives I could use: petty, small, thin-skinned. I mean, what are we doing here, London? I mean, come on. Are you really that upset that someone did their job and questioned whether or not maybe a scoring play wasn't accurate in the context of a very public streak? That's it. If that's all it took to make you flip out and ban media, I mean, come on. The league isn't yours. The league is the fans. Let's be real here. And Mike, on your Fridays with Farwell, I'll just end by saying you had an interesting point where you said you think this might just be strategic with the Hunters, that they're trying to create this dynamic of everyone's out to get them, and that's kind of how they get their players riled up. And if so, maybe, sure. But frankly, with everything going on in the world these days, I'm getting a little tired of this everyone is out to get us kind of mentality. So yeah, come on. Let's be bigger than this.
I think it might have to do with more than just the question around the streak and the scoring play that may or may not have resulted in an assist that kept the streak going. But I'll get to that in just a moment. You mentioned the Fridays with Farwell video. And yeah, like this could be a master stroke of inspiration here for the team to, again, perpetuate the narrative that everybody is against the London Knights, because the reality here, Dan, is if that wasn't the case, I think you and I are both going to agree that this could not possibly have been the outcome that the London Knights wanted in all of this. Obviously, they were upset, and I can tell you because I was in the arena. I was one of the media members involved in this, and my broadcast partner, Paul Fixter, went over to do his usual pregame interview that he does in every rink, including London, every time. It's an opportunity for us on our broadcasts to share with the fans a little bit from the opposing team because particularly in a radio broadcast, you've got home fans listening when you're on the road, and we want them to get the perspective from the other team. A lot of times we'll talk to players on that other team that come from the region where we live, so you can keep up with or catch up with a player that maybe you watched, or a neighbor, or a kid that you knew from the neighborhood back in the day, that sort of thing. It's just a way really to promote the players, to elevate the game, to provide fans listening more information. And Paul was told in no uncertain terms that it's got nothing to do with him. He's a good guy. It's that other guy. And that other guy would be me, yours truly, that obviously has said something or some things that have upset the London Knights to the point where they decided to violate the OHL's media policy. But I can tell you that I've been in several rinks since that happened last Tuesday, and it's virtually the only thing that people are talking about. The jokes keep coming. They're wondering what the heck happened. They call me a troublemaker now, et cetera, et cetera. But this can't be really what the London Knights wanted. Could it, Dan? To put attention back on the streak when everybody had moved away from it, and I know it's done now anyway, but even before that, it gets the streak back in the conversation. People, again, are looking at this old video and questioning it. They're calling the London Knights soft and petty and small, all these different things. That can't be. So I've got to go with the fact they're just trying to perpetuate the narrative that, hey, it's London versus everybody. And just look, they still are trying to get us.
You might be right. You might be right that they kind of relish this role of the evil empire and us against everyone. It might just be kind of in their DNA. Because if it's not, I have a tip for them. If you don't want to be looked upon that way, don't do things like banning media members from talking to your team who had nothing to do with any of it. And secondly, there's a lot of things that probably could be said about your team that would upset you, that would cause you to have this kind of a reaction. And many of those things, the right professional thing to do would be have a phone call, have an offline conversation, try and sort through it. A lot of those things would be a lot worse than a media member just questioning a minor scoring play with perfectly valid reason to do so. If that is what sets you off, I think it might be time to look in the mirror. That's all I'm going to say about it, Mike, and I'm not someone that has any kind of horse in the race. I'm just going to say this particular thing was a really pathetic, in my opinion, reaction to what occurred.
I'm really struggling with this. I'm going to be honest, because obviously I am essentially at the center of the story, which is never where I want to be. And so I'm going to go a little bit further here. So brace yourself and buckle in. And if you don't want to listen anymore, you can just hit that fast forward button and get to the wraparound, which of course is still coming up as it happens every week on the OHL podcast. But I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I'm still pretty frustrated by all of it. So here goes. The irony in all of this is that it originally came to my attention after I shared a highlight the morning after the game in question of the play, not realizing there was a controversy around the assist on the play. I just shared it as an example of something that, was kind of a busted player. The London Knights made a lot out of a little in order to score a goal. I share that video. Somebody points out to me that there had been an assist awarded to Easton Cowan. So I looked closer at the video and I thought, to me, it didn't look like Easton Cowan got an assist on that particular play. There was a front page story on my local newspaper that day that talked about a controversial video that cast doubt on the validity of the streak. So, much like others would have done, I looked more closely at the video. I saw what I saw, and I shared that I thought the puck had been tipped after it left Easton Cowan's stick. Therefore, he would have been the third assist on the play, which we don't award. And that was the end of that. A day later, Mark Hunter is quoted in the London paper as saying that I'm out in left field if I think that puck was tipped. And that's fine. I shared my opinion. Mark shared his opinion. And that should have been the end of it until we got to the game where all of this has happened. So, look, this happened in the last week. I'm coming up this summer. It'll be 30 years since I was first hired part time at a radio station back in June of 1995. I've been around this game for a long time, and in that time, I've learned a heck of a lot. I've evolved as a human and as a broadcaster, and I'm in a much different place today than I was 30 years ago. But I will be the first to admit that I have said some stupid shit in my life, okay? On the air, off the air, but in this case, particularly, including on the air. When you've been on the air that long, naturally it's going to happen. And when you're younger and less experienced, and maybe, I mean, I think I'm still pretty damn passionate generally. And when I express an opinion, I express it passionately. But I've certainly learned over the years to not make it personal. When I have in the past, going back to the stupid stuff that I have said historically, I once on my post game show many, many years ago called out Ted Baker, the former VP of this league, so bad. Like, I mean, like it was listening back now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit embarrassed about it. And you know what? Ted and I talked about it afterwards. And do you think I was ever denied access to Ted Baker again? Same with criticisms of the former commissioner, David Branch. We still always talked. He still always came on and granted an interview. I once called the former head coach of the Owen Sound Attack a dick. Not directly, but kind of indirectly. And boy, do you think Ryan McGill was happy about that? And when I realized the interpretation, I'll give you the backstory. It was a playoff series. Owen Sound's up 7-1 in the third period against the Kitchener Rangers. They get a power play. They throw out the first power play unit. I get on social media and say, well, that's an interesting choice, isn't it? You're up 7-1. You throw out the first power play unit in the third period of a playoff game. You score. Now it's 8-1. Why did you need the first power play unit out there? And somebody responded to what I put on social media. And my response to that somebody was, it's a dick move. I didn't mean to imply even. I just thought, as a movie, you're doing that with intent. But I made it kind of personal, and Ryan McGill didn't like that. And you know what? The next game, I had to eat a little bit of crow and apologize because certainly wasn't my intention. And to his credit, we chatted, we shook hands. He gave me the pregame interview, and we moved on. And then I'll tell you what else too. The next time I was up in Owen Sound, the late great Ray McKelvey had a thing or two. Mr. Hockey, the guy that brought junior hockey to Owen Sound, had a thing or two to say. And we talked about it. We talked about all kinds of history between the Owen Sound Attack and the Kitchener Rangers. And then we moved on. And Ray was a great friend up until the very end. I could find myriad examples of this over time, but I'm a different person from those experiences. And I'm confident when I say today that even as passionately as I continue to express opinions, it's never personal. It's never done in a personal way. And so I'm thinking about this podcast that we've been doing. And over the almost 4 years since it first started, it too has evolved. And I don't know about you, Dan, but I'm really happy with where this podcast is at today. It's one of the best sources of information for Ontario Hockey League fans. We're getting touch points from every single market in this league. And I'm always thinking when we're talking about a story in the Sioux, about the fan in Erie. When we're talking about a story in Windsor, I'm thinking about the fan in Ottawa as we look at the furthest east, west, north, south points of this league. Sometimes it's hard for fans to get information about their own team in their market, certainly for teams that are out of market. And the more information we can provide, the bigger I think the fan base can grow for this league. And that's what I really want to see. So I'm so happy with where this podcast is at right now. And then this happens. Look, I get it. You want to circle the wagons, you want to get behind your teammate, and I applaud the London Knights for that. I applaud the London fan base for that. I get it. And I get the feeling that maybe this is the last straw, if you will, because if we go back to last season, there was something else that I put out on a Fridays with Farwell video, and you can go back and check all these things. And I would ask you to check them out objectively when you do. Try to remove your own bias or emotion from it. And there was a quote that I read after a game that the London Knights were involved in, where the opposing coach said they tried to drag the game into the gutter. That's a pretty provocative quote. And look, I'm nobody's fool. I know what makes a good story. And Dan, you and I every week, right? We're going back and forth over text to determine what are the best stories, the biggest stories to bring to this podcast every week, right? That's what we want to do, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's well, as a media source, like that's so if you follow the chain, this is what annoys me about all of it is the league is nothing without the fans. The media helps bring those fans in by telling the stories. The teams need that. The coaches need that. To stifle that, in my opinion, you better have a darn good reason. And like you said, you just talked about a number of occasions where you felt you crossed a line or these things happen. Fair enough. We can hash those things out. All I'm saying in the entire at this point about what happened this week with London Knights is if this is what you consider crossing a line and cause for circling the wagons and restricting media access and frankly slapping the face of the fans who you've brought into this story and brought into this league, then I think you need to check yourself a little because there's going to be a lot worse going forward. I'm sure you've experienced a lot worse in the past. That's why, to me, at the end of the day, the only thing I can rationalize in my head is this is some sort of WWE mentality. We'll play the villain. We're going to make a story out of everything. We're gonna really get our fan base involved. Circle the wagons, as you said. It has to be something like that because there's, to me, as kind of a neutral observer to all this, there's just no way this should ruffle feathers to the extent it did. This is just a minor comment on a story in the league, fairly objective comment as far as I'm concerned. And the people thinking otherwise or attacking have to kind of check themselves and say, where do your biases lie? Because I think most of the fans that have nothing to do with either of these two teams could look at that and say, well, that was a valid thing to raise. What's the problem here? So I think we just got to be careful because this league is based on the fans. And when you start doing things like restricting access to interviews, you better have a darn good reason, in my opinion. This was not it.
And I love the passion of the fans. And London's got some passionate fans. It has 9,000 people in that building virtually every home game for the Knights. So, yeah, I'll admit when I come across a quote as juicy as they tried to drag the game into the gutter, I'm going to use that as a springboard to tell a story. And the story that I told at the time was that the London Knights were kind of bringing back some old school, physical, in your face hockey. If you can't beat them in the alley, you can't beat them in the rink. And by the way, they were the most penalized team in the Ontario Hockey League last year. It's not an insult. It's not a criticism. It's a fact. And they should be quite proud of themselves, I would say, for having won an OHL championship with that brand of hockey. I'm also, by the way, I'm here for it. Dan, you and I have talked this season already on this podcast about the 3-fight limit and whether or not we think that it might be a little bit on the low side. I love the physical part of the game. And look around the league. Have you seen the Windsor Spitfires this year? Do you think they want to get pushed around when they're playing hockey against the London Knights? I'll I get accused of bias all the time, and I'll get to that in a moment. But let me just throw this in there. Do you think it's an accident that Matthew Lachar is a member of the Kitchener Rangers this year after the way the Knights pushed around Kitchener last year? Come on. And be proud of that. You've kind of brought something back into the game that many people will celebrate. Some won't, but many will. And look, you won a championship with it. So I told that story last year. And again, if you can look at it objectively, the facts are right there. It's not an insult, it's not a criticism. There was also a player last year that just so happened to have 7 suspensions over the course of the season. 7. So again, going back to what we just talked about with the fights, there's a limit of 3 before you start getting suspended in this league. It just made for an interesting talking point. I thought that's a lot of suspensions for one player. Nobody asked that the player be kicked out of the league. Nobody said the player was a terrible person or a terrible player. It was just noted that there were 7 suspensions to one guy. And we asked the question, there's a limit to fights. Do you think there should be a limit to suspensions? And just to show how notable that is, because again, Dan and I are looking for the stories every week. Dan, what do you think the most suspensions to any one player is so far this season?
Oh, good question. So you had 7 last year? Yeah, I'll, can't be more than 3, can it?
Nailed it. That's exactly the number. And Dan and I did not prepare this in advance. We are three
Yeah.
quarters of the way through the season. Okay. And the player with the most suspensions so far has had three. There are a handful of guys, maybe six or seven, who have had two. And here we are. So, of course, a number like seven stands out. And I promise you that Dan and I would have been talking about these things if it was a player in Sarnia or a player in North Bay or a player in Flint. It just so happened to be a player in London. So, look, I get it, London. I get it, London fans. I get it, Mark Hunter and the entire Knights organization. Maybe you do feel a little put upon, but objectively speaking, this is all fact based and nobody has made it personal. I'm confident in that. And that's the way we conduct ourselves here. That's the way I conduct myself professionally and personally. So, where does this leave us in a situation like this? If there are stories that are emanating from, well, let's be specific here, London, and when you talk about them, it leads to enough frustration that the team is going to bar access to the media before a game, violating the OHL's media policy. And they're going to say it's because of that guy, who is this guy with the big mouth right now, going on and on about this. But what's the underlying message here then? You can't talk about the team at all, or you can only talk about the team if you talk about the team in the manner that the team wants to be talked about. And that, I would argue, and Dan, I think you're going to agree, is a very dangerous precedent, whether it's in sports or politics or wherever you want to have it.
100%, Mike, and I'll try not to go totally down this rabbit hole, or we'll be here for 2 hours talking about this. But this is probably one of the things that drives me nuts the most in today's society, is that media has a very important role to play, an extremely important role, and that's been one of the pillars of society for years. And as some media outlets have been kind of corrupted to be more propaganda outfits, this has been become accepted, and people in organizations, fans of organizations, supporters of political parties start to get this notion that no one can say anything they don't like about the team, the organization that they support. And that's not what media's role is. It's not to just say the good things, not be a PR wing of this organization. If you can't handle anything negative being brought up about whoever you support, then you're not cut out to be a part of this discourse, period. And that means accepting the negative just as much as you accept the positive. If you can accept people talking about what a wonderful organization you are, everything that's terrific, then you're expecting people to care about those conversations. Those conversations are not genuine and not legitimate if you don't cover the whole gamut, which is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's what the media's role is. And if you want us to talk about this league and bring up these stories, well, then we're going to talk about this league and bring up these stories. And something like a streak is a very big story. So we're going to chat about it. But yeah, this control over what should or should not be said is a little ridiculous. If someone crosses the line, fine. Makes it personal, fine. But that's not what this is. This is controlling the message, and that is the first step towards in the wrong direction, in my opinion, in any regard when it comes to media.
It wasn't too long ago, Dan, that we were on this podcast raising an eyebrow about the Flint Firebirds. First of all, that they were underperforming based on the moves they had made in the offseason, and then what we thought to be a pretty curious deadline with the acquisition of Sam McHugh. And you know what? I've been in Flint since, and I could not have been welcomed more generously. It was a fantastic welcome and a great visit to Flint recently. We also have been talking at some length about the Erie Otters and the Stan Butler firing and the way that whole situation was handled. And we were clear that we disagreed with the way that it was handled. We presented the way that we would have liked to have seen it handled. I was in Erie during the midst of that discourse as well, and they couldn't have been more accommodating, just like always. So these are the things. Again, if we're not making it personal, if we're making observations and sharing our opinions without making them personal, I think that's the way it should go. So let's come back to this issue of bias. And again, if you go back and check our receipts on this podcast on the Fridays with Farwell channel, you'll hear that it's not personal. And if you try to remove the bias that you might have coming in, you can view it more objectively. I'll be the first to admit that, yes, I am biased insofar as I grew up in the city of Kitchener. I went to Kitchener Rangers games with my father as a kid. I love them. Yeah, I'm a fan. Does that affect my perspective on the team and on its place in the league? Absolutely. But I would submit to you, there's actually it's more harmful to the team than good, because if I'm being honest here, Dan, and I think you're going to agree with me, is there honestly, big picture, a better story in the Ontario Hockey League this year than the quote unquote rebuilding Kitchener Rangers sitting third place, second most points in the entire Ontario Hockey League? Is there a better story than that?
Good question. I mean, there's a few good stories in the league this year, but if you look at our standings predictions before the year, I can say the Kitchener Rangers are the one team that's making me look really bad. I had them eighth in the West, and they're running away with, well, they're going to be top three for sure. Currently second points. So yeah, that's a significant improvement on where they were expected to be, and just steady as she goes. Right, have not lost three in a row all year. Just keep rolling. So yeah, I think when you look at the positive stories around the league this year, Mike, biases aside, they have to be right near the top of the list.
I would agree. And sure, we could find other ones. I think Windsor's a great story
Yep.
this year. And again, Kingston's a great story. But how many times have we spent a length of time on this podcast talking about, boy, those Kitchener Rangers are rolling right along? It hardly happens. So the bias actually works against them, because we're trying very hard to not just make it all about the Kitchener Rangers, even though they're one of the best stories in the league this year, in my opinion. I, I'm going to add one more thing to this, and then I'm going to let it go. And, if you're still with us, bless your heart for all of this, how the sausage is made going on. But I've been asked many times over the years, because this had been going on for quite some time, is that stuff between you and Ryan Payette with the London Free Press for real? Because there was a lot of back and forth between Ryan and I on social media leading up to and then during every London Knights game, London Knights Kitchener Rangers game. And I didn't want to reveal the answer because I didn't want to take away the entertainment value. But the truth is, no, I always thought it was for poops and giggles. And look, again, like I said at the outset of all of this, I don't want to be at the center of this story. I didn't want to make the games between the Knights and the Rangers about Payette and Farwell. I don't think the Knights and Rangers rivalry needs anything more to it. But I did think, hey, if this puts more ears on my broadcasts, more eyes on what Payette writes, good. And if it gets more interest in the league because there's this rivalry even off the ice, it's fantastic. I thought it was all fun and games. I took the guy a jar of olives one time with a picture of David Branch on it to extend the olive branch. You see, thought we were having fun. I've known Ryan for 15 years. He lives in my community, doesn't live in London. He's one of us here in the region of Waterloo. He used to play in the same slow pitch league as that guy did. I'd see him in the off season. I I wouldn't like, it's not that we hung out and drank beers, but professionally and personally, I'd call him friendly for sure. I thought it was all for fun and games until last season, going back to they dragged the game into the gutter, and the video that I put out following that, using that quote as a springboard for the video. And that led to Ryan contacting the Kitchener Rangers organization at the behest of London Knights management to inquire what the Kitchener Rangers thought about Farwell's quote unquote anti Knights rant. And that crossed a professional line. I'm just being honest with you here, pulling back the curtain for you. There's a code. There's a code in hockey. There's a code in media. And I've been around long enough to remember the days where you did not utter the name of another media person or other media outlet if they were a competitor. That goes for TV and newspaper if you're in radio. We're long since past that. We're all trying to do the best we can in a shrinking space with shrinking resources. You don't have to like the way somebody else does their job, but you respect it and let them go about doing it. Media on media violence is not acceptable, period. And what Ryan did in making it public and even putting into his story that he had reached out to the Kitchener Rangers is created the perception that I'm an employee of the Kitchener Rangers. Ryan knows that I'm not. And so that crossed the line with me. I am an employee of Rogers Sports and Media. And if you want to complain or you want to hear what they think of what I have to say, reach out to them. I don't want to embarrass the Kitchener Rangers ever. I hope that I'm a good ambassador for them and this league. I really do. But that crossed a line. Anytime you want, reach out to my bosses at Rogers. They kind of let me do what I want because they trust me. If I cross a line, they will definitely let me know. But I'm not an employee of the Kitchener Rangers. And to put that out there and make it seem like I am just reinforces the problem that we're having in all of this. So to tie it off here today and put this behind us, when this happened to Paul Fixter and I in the Canada Life Place Arena last week, we didn't make us think about it. We had to fill time on our broadcast, and we explained why we couldn't get our pregame interview. I did not know at the time that there was a league representative in the building. I got a visit during the first intermission that night from said league representative asking if it was true what had happened. I said, yeah, that's what happened. But I said, you know what? I don't care. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. If they don't want to have their team or their players profiled on our broadcast, that's up to them. I'm not going to lose any sleep. The next time I come here, I'll just prepare a different pregame show. And the league rep said, no, I'm going to, look into this. I'm going to let them know because it violates league policy. And there's a reason the policy exists for all the things that you've already said, Dan. But that was it. I let it go. I didn't file a formal complaint. I didn't press it. I said I didn't care. And then the story showed up in the newspaper. I didn't ask for it to be published, and I'm not blaming the person that published it. It was a talking point from that game, but I didn't want any of this. I don't want any of this. I just want this podcast, and I want to be a part of this podcast building this league. I want to share information with fans. I want to tell stories. I want to share some opinions, absolutely. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it right there. That's a lot, eh? That's a real lot.
Yeah, it's a great way to tie it off, and I think everyone understands personal relationships and how reporters covering teams are going to build somewhat of a personal relationship with those teams, the people involved over the course of the year, and the trust there is required to do the job properly. The fine line for me is these teams, whomever you are, owners, GMs, coaches, the lines that can be crossed. We talked about the lines that can be crossed in the media. The lines that can be crossed the other way is anyone that's expecting the media to carry the mail for you and to do your bidding, to never say anything negative, to just kind of be a PR wing of the team. If that's your expectation, you're probably in the wrong business and you won't last if you're trying to go to higher levels. So just keep that in mind because we can put a lot of people in tough positions, including the media, if that's the expectation. So not everything said about your team is always going to be rosy because that's not realistic for it to be. You expect honesty and you expect respect, and if we can all just keep it in those boundaries, I think we'll all be fine. That's my Dr. Phil tie up, Mike.
I hope that we have displayed our honesty here, and I hope that we have, well, earned. But if we've lost some respect, that's okay too. You never have to listen. You've got other options. We hope you stay here. We hope you stick with us. We hope you share opinions too. And like I said, that's a pretty deep dive into how the sausage is made. But I've been feeling it for about a week now, and I wanted to just lay it all out there, come hell or high water, love it or lump it, and let us know how you feel. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. Happy to hear from you anytime. Plenty still to come, of course, on this episode of the OHL podcast, including your weekly wraparound where we look at every single team and find something to tell you about them. So that means the team in your market as well. Plus, could the first European head coach in the Ontario Hockey League be around a little bit longer? We'll find that out as we continue this week's episode of the OHL podcast. This NHL season has been as predictable as a puck rolling on its edge. No one knows where it's going, but that just means there's time for your favorite team to figure things out and games left for you to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. And if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Dan Mahar, the genius of the new feature we have added to this podcast is, I think anyway, it keeps people interested because they want to hear what we're going to say about the team in their market, right? So hopefully, we didn't lose you in the first 30 because now we're going to get to that feature. Every team gets a little bit of love every week on this podcast, a little something that we call the wraparound. And just because we are equitable like that, Dan, let's go in reverse alphabetical order this time, okay? Because if you were a kid with the last name starting with Z
Yeah.
in school when it came to attendance, you always got called last for things. We're going to go reverse alphabetical order because we're all about the equity here on the podcast.
Good call, Mike. I was an M, so I didn't care. I was in the middle either way. But
Yeah,
yes, let's.
I was close enough to the front, but yeah. Anyway,
No, it's
and
very
I
equitable.
always had to stand at the front for pictures though, which I hated because obviously I could
Oh,
stand. Other kids in the front row had to kneel, and I was still standing anyway. Dan, you've got the Western Conference this week, my friend. Start us off at the bottom of the alphabet. I think that means Windsor.
it does mean Windsor, and I just wanted to point out a really unique 2-2 this week for someone on the Windsor Spitfires, and that is our buddy Ethan Belchet's going to be a dominant player in this league for a couple years at least before his NHL draft year. 2 goals this year in his game versus Sarnia before an ejection for slew footing, which led to a 2-game suspension. So an odd 2-2 for Belchet's this week, Mike.
You remember when we called it the Belches, I think early in the season, right? 4 goals, an assist, and a fight. So it's not like the Gordie Howe hat trick is 1-1-1, fight, goal, assist. And Belches had 4 goals, an assist, and a fight, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
the scouts will not hate seeing some of that in his game.
That's true. So we go from that to the 2-2. Interesting.
Yes.
In Sudbury, the Wolves they've got something cooking this season under Scott Barney and his staff. A year after the team loaded up for a run that didn't quite pan out, the culture is good enough to attract RPI commit Jack Ziliotto from the BCHL's Trail Smoke Eaters. Now, meantime, Jets prospect Kieran Walton is having himself a season, registering his 30th goal and 75th point this past weekend. That makes Walton one of only 4 OHLers who are top 10 in both goals and assists this season. Ilya Protas, Liam Greentree, and Michael Misa are the others. And the Wolves also held a charity auction of their Indigenous Night jerseys this past week to support youth sports and mental wellness programs in Indigenous communities.
Very nice. Moving up to the Sioux, Mike, a theme in my wraparound this week is I've got a couple unique stat lines from games. So the second one is one of the bright spots for the Sioux this year has been Marco Mignosa constantly throughout the year. And he came up with a shorthanded goal, power play goal, and even strength goal in his game versus North Bay this week. So a unique stat line for him this week as well.
In Peterborough, the Pete's Pink in the Rink fundraiser raised more than $45,000 for the Canadian Cancer Society. Brody Partridge played in his 100th OHL game. He was a 13th rounder in 2022. So kids, no matter which round you get picked in, you might turn it into an OHL career. And I guess you can also call the Pete's streak stoppers now, because in a 3-1 loss to London, Peterborough did not allow Easton Cowan to register a point. The Petes also, interestingly, in that game, down 3-1 late, did not pull their goalie, Dan.
That was some Easton on Easton violence, I think, because it was
Easton Rye was in that.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Switching over to Sarnia, Mike, I know they're not going to be thrilled with their last outing, the effort-wise, compete-wise, so I'm going to try and keep it a little positive and just point out that Ohio State commit Matthew Manza has joined the team recently, 5 points for 7 games. Looks like they've got a keeper there, so hopefully they can keep him a little longer.
So you don't want to kind of pour salt into the injury wound with the Carter Kostic gone for the season, eh?
Tough news. Yeah, tough news.
So tough. Things aren't exactly rosy in the nation's capital either, but we'll do our best in Ottawa. After Chris Barlas played in game number 200 a week ago, Nick Whitehead reached milestone game number 100 this past weekend. He's a native of Orlando, Florida, a second rounder to the 67s last year. Ottawa currently in a battle with North Bay for that final playoff spot in the East.
A tight race there too.
It is.
Speaking of races, so post deadline, talk about humming offensively. The Saginaw Spirit, points in 7 of their last 10 after the trade deadline when they sold, and now a league goal scoring lead of 231 goals for that team. Michael Misa 1 point from 100, and Igor Chernyshov shows up and had about 14 points in his first 5 games. So that team offensively is a wagon right now, Mike.
It certainly is. There's a few teams like Kingston, too, is flying since the trade deadline. But yeah, Saginaw is going to be a very difficult out in the first round in the West for sure.
Indeed.
In Oshawa, Ducks prospect Beckett Seneca has established a new career high in points with his 69th of the season this past weekend, an assist in the Gens 5-2 win over Ottawa. Avs prospect Callum Ritchie also had a hat trick in that game. His first regular season hat trick. Go figure. And that moves Ritchie into a tie for 16th all-time in Oshawa general scoring with 240 points. At the pace he is scoring this season, Ritchie has a chance to climb into the top 10 all-time in Gens scoring. That's if he can add another 30 points in his remaining 18 games. He's on pace to do it, though, so you never know.
And that's saying some good names on that list.
You betcha.
Up in Snow and Sound, Mike, I want to point out a couple. So lots. Is it me or does Owen Sound always have a budding offensive superstar? And here we go again. Pierce Bowie, first period hat trick against Kitchener this week. That 16-year-old joins some pretty elite company in Owen Sound to hit the 20-goal mark for a 16-year-old. Names that you've seen in the NHL. So pretty good list there. And also large goaltender Trenton Bennett from Kitchener got the start in his hometown, came close to getting the win there, had to put in a really good effort. And the Owen Sound attack noted that one of the reasons he got the start was pressure from scouts to get a look at this kid, which is interesting.
6'7", and that's before he puts on the skates, Dan.
Yes. 6'9", 6'9" with them on there, Mike. So
you can cover a lot of crease, that boy, a lot of crease. North Bay battling, as we mentioned, with Ottawa for that final playoff spot in the East. Somebody that's heating up, though, and maybe helping push the battalion into that final playoff spot is overager Andrew LeBlanc. Think about this. He's picked up more than 1/3 of his season point total in just the past 7 games. Let that sink in. 2 goals, 6 assists for 8 points in 7 games. Part of a 21-point season so far. LeBlanc is playing for his 4th OHL team after being drafted by Kitchener, traded to Niagara, then to Sarnia, and now North Bay. With 19 games to play, LeBlanc is 5 goals away from establishing a new career high. Andrew and his twin brother Jacob are committed to Princeton for next season.
Call that them a hard bump, by the way, Farwell, because every time I mention anyone's challenges on this podcast, they have a great week. So
there you go.
All right. So moving to London, our friends down the road, just wanted to point out a phenomenal season. We're seeing a breakout season from defender Jared Woolley here, leading the league with his plus 41, but also sneaky offense too. So showing some slick hands diving into the play, but knowing when to dive into the play as well. So Jared Woolley has elevated from solid defender to elite this year. And it's nice to see that progression.
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I heard that number correctly on the plus minus.
41.
Okay, I thought that's what you said. I think that's pretty good, right?
It's decent. It's decent.
It's not bad. Okay, yeah. Jared, if you really try hard, you might get better. Plus 43 or something. Holy Hannah, it's a good number. The Niagara Ice Dogs, a rough weekend. No pun intended with Ice Dogs, but they surrendered 16 goals in a pair of losses to Sudbury and Kitchener. First came a 7-3 loss to the Wolves at home on Friday, and then a 9-1 rout at the hands of the Rangers on Saturday. Now, that's the 3rd time this season that Niagara has given up 9 in a game. The Ice Dogs, 213 goals against, is second only to Guelph, which has allowed 216, and that includes 10 in a loss to Saginaw on Saturday. They had a football score at the Sleeman Center. 10-7 was the final of the game. But I don't mean to pick on you, Ice Dogs, but those numbers kind of stand out.
Yeah, it's a good segue to my next team, which is Kitchener, Mike, who was there this weekend. I think the Ice Dogs have seen enough of Cameron's because Cameron Arquette popped a couple, Cameron Mercer with 3 assists in that game. But it's a Cam Bull I wanted to point out with Kitchener this week. I just like to point out the unsung heroes in this league every now and then. And Carson Campbell has been a rock on the back end for Kitchener with his plus 16 and his 22 points. Just a warrior. Doesn't take a shift off. You know, if Carson Campbell makes a mistake, it's an honest, hardworking one. It's not a lazy one taking a shift off. And it's those unsung heroes, Mike, that drive teams.
I got all the time in the world for that kid, having the opportunity to get to know him over the years in Kitchener, obviously. I'll look at Kingston next, where the Fronts picked up a 3-1 win at home Friday over Flint. And that ties the franchise record for consecutive home wins with 9. It's the third time in franchise history Kingston has won 9 in a row at home. The other 2 teams to do it were the 1981-82 Canadians and the 1989-90 Frontenacs, which was the first season of the Front's name. Now, here's the kicker. They can set a new franchise record for consecutive wins at home if they can beat the Kitchener Rangers at Slush Puppy Place this Friday. You want to set a record when I'm in the building, eh? Is that what's going to happen? So there you go. A little added drama for the Rangers-Fronts game this week.
Very nice. It'll be a great game, by the way.
It will
So,
for sure.
yeah. And Mike, I know we talked last week about how you love the Guelph Storms promotion on jock straps, but
Oh, the Royal City jockstraps.
it was a great promotion, right?
It
But did
was.
you hear about the promotion they're doing this weekend, which is a goal every shift? I don't know. Maybe that might not have been an official promotion, but that's pretty much the way they're rolling. First of all, storming back, if you'll forgive the pun, from a 4-0 deficit, North Bay to win 5-4 in OT. And then you just referenced that 10-7 game, Mike. So 14 against, 12-4 in those last 2 outings. That's a whole lot of offense if you go see the Storm play.
It's worth it. And listen, the fans are filling that building. They really are. There were good crowds in Niagara this past weekend as well. Unfortunately, seeing them scored against an awful lot. But I think we touched on this last week. It's a good market, Guelph, for junior hockey. And even though the team's struggling this season, they keep filling them. So there you go.
For sure. And a quick shout out to one of their fans who hit the 60 mark of all CHL ranks in attendance this week. So shout out to him. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, Steve does, it's called the CHL 60 or CHL in 60. OHL,
CHL, yeah.
Steve. CHL?
Yeah.
Okay. So fellow podcaster right there, Steve McLean. Keep it up, buddy. But yes, all 60, fourth person only to do it. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
It is. Yeah.
All right. Off to Brantford, where Blackhawks prospect Nick Lardis did not just reach 50 goals this past weekend. He reached it in fewer than 50 games. And that joins a pretty elite club that features only 7 other players, including John Tavares and Nick Robertson. Robertson and Dane Fox, former Erie Otter, were the fastest ever to reach 50 goals in OHL history. They did it in 43 games. Lardis scored goals number 50 and 51 in game number 49. And while we're talking milestones, a shout out to Bulldogs play-by-play man Reed Duffy, who called his 500th Bulldogs game last weekend.
Congratulations, Nick and Reed. Both good milestones.
Absolutely.
Jumping down to Flint, Mike, the final of my theme on stat lines. This one's kind of your ho-hum Sam McHugh with the Gordie Howe hat trick against Peterborough, the goal, the assist, the fight. But more importantly, McHugh has been a big piece in turning that team around. Another great Eastern Road swing, wrapping up with a win in Ottawa. A little bit of a fire coming from the Firebirds lately, Mike, led in large part by Mr. McHugh.
I mentioned this with Saginaw before, and people that I'm hearing from, Dan, are suggesting that they wouldn't be all that interested in meeting the Flint Firebirds in the first round. So you're right. They're starting to move in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, they're rolling. Yeah.
I know there aren't many fans in Brampton to really care, but those of us who observed the game, you mentioned earlier in this podcast, Dan, how bad one of your preseason predictions looked. Well, how about me with the Brampton Steelheads? And I know I wasn't the only one bullish on them. It's just one weekend, but what a weekend it was for Brampton, putting up 16 goals over 2 games. And Kraken prospect Carson Rakoff reached 30 goals on the season while tying a career high with 6 points. He picked up 3 goals and 3 assists in Brampton's 10-3 romp over Erie. The hat trick was the 10th of Rakoff's OHL career, and the game marked his second 6-point effort. Rakoff had a 2-goal and 4-assist performance in a 7-3 win over Sarnia while he was a Kitchener Ranger. Rakoff has scored 131 goals in his OHL career so far.
16 goals in 2 games for that team against some pretty good competition. So look out. They might have unlocked what we were expecting all year. So
They might have. They might have.
all right, Mike. Well, I'm going to end the West with Erie. And, you look to your veteran players sometimes in a 10-3 loss this week. One stat that jumped off the page to me, when you're losing a game 10-3, the game we just talked about, Martin Misiak somehow managed to be a +2 for those Erie Otters. And then turned out the next game and got 3 points in his game for a win over the Sudbury Wolves. So you look to your leaders to get you back in shape, and he did.
And I will finish off the East in Barrie, where Canucks prospect Riley Patterson and Stars prospect Emil Hemming have been heating up for the Barrie Colts, each player picking up 12 points in their past 7 games. Patterson, 3 goals and 9 assists. Hemming has 5 and 7. The Colts also held off the high-flying Kingston Frontenacs in a Tuesday night game to hang on to first place in the East, and they have won 9 of 10 overall. Things looking pretty good there in Barrie.
They've got a lot of depth of scoring there, Mike, as you just outlined. They remind me a little bit of the Kingston Frontenacs that way. There's a whole lot of teams in that East you wouldn't want to face in the first round.
We are getting to that time of the season where we can start thinking about playoffs. The London Knights clinched a playoff spot in their win over Kitchener. The Rangers next 2 games later did it in their win over the Niagara Ice Dogs early February, and teams starting to clinch playoff spots. Lots of fun in the final quarter of the season for sure. And that is your weekly wraparound where we take a look at every single team in this Ontario Hockey League. Hey, if there's a story you want to highlight for us, always drop an email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. We love your emails and your questions, which we will answer in just a moment. Plus, your weekly prospect of the week coming up on this episode of the OHL Podcast. Lots of ways to keep in touch with us on this podcast. You'll find Dan on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm at Farwell_OHL. Don't forget our YouTube channel. We are on Instagram at the OHL Podcast. And we love getting your emails. If you've got questions, we'll do our best to give you answers. Dan, this one comes from Michael, who's a big fan from Saginaw. There we go with Michigan again. Didn't we give Michigan enough love on the podcast last week?
We'll keep doing it if we keep getting these great followers.
Michael says, let me see. Welcome you to the home of a bunch of outrageous hockey fans. He's looking forward to the next trip that we take back to Saginaw because they're outrageous hockey fans, to which I responded, outrageous hockey fans are our favorite kinds of hockey fans for sure. So the question that Michael poses is this: my understanding has always been that the broadcasters are supposed to try and maintain neutrality, especially when doing play-by-play for the CHL TV broadcasts. I'm not asking for a monotonous play-by-play, and I appreciate inflections in pace and tone for exciting moments, but I don't always feel as though there's equal love, let's say, given to each team. Dan, I know as a fan of an NHL team that is not the Toronto Maple Leafs, you feel this in your bones quite often.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of a complicated thing for me, Mike, because broadcasting is one of those things I feel the same way as about officiating. Is that everyone likes to criticize it, but everyone should have to do it first because it's a lot harder than people think, and for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's professionalism aspects that come into it in terms of learning the pronunciation of every name, being able to get it at the drop of a hat in the mid game. But you're obviously going to lean to your knowledge base more, which is the team you cover the most. So you might lean a little more in favor of them in terms of certain things. So what I look for in a broadcast, Mike, in terms of keeping it somewhat balanced, is like you said, objectivity in terms of the calls. You know, not every call against your team is a bad call. Like let's be fair here, but also the one pet peeve I have is please try and identify the players on the visiting team as much as possible, because there's sometimes I'll watch a broadcast. I'm not just talking OHL here, but I'll watch a broadcast and you can go 3-4 minutes of play without even hearing a name from the visiting team. Puck goes to the visiting team. The visiting team has it, comes back to so and so, and every time it's a player on the home team, they get addressed by name, etc. But as soon as it goes to the other team, oh, it just went to the other team. So there's little things that I think creep into some broadcasts that you're not, that you notice over time, and then the God forbid you hear the we're getting a power play here. Like some of those things creep in every now and then, but by and large, I find the crews do a really good job. They do their homework ahead of time. Anecdotes on air about both teams. Lots of respect extended both ways. So I just say it's a tough gig, Mike. Having never done by play myself, I guarantee you do that, you coach, you referee, try it, you'll have a pretty different perspective, I think.
Michael, it's a great question. And what Dan said. Okay. I'll add a few things to it. The we thing, I love that you brought that up. I extend plenty of grace to color commentators because oftentimes they are former members of a team or maybe coaches with a team. And Dennis Rosie, I'm looking at you, buddy. I love Rosie. I love him. And he's a Saginaw guy through and through. You hear a lot of wheeze from him, and I'm here for it. I also extend more latitude, and it's not just because I am one, but to radio broadcasters than TV broadcasters, because radio broadcasters are broadcasters for a home team, right? Even when they travel with a team, but the assumption is that the lion's share of the audience is for that particular team. Your point, though, Michael, in general, and Dan touches all the right notes on this, is yeah, you would like to see or hear some sort of neutrality. The challenge that the Ontario Hockey League has here is that they are working with a crew of broadcasters that are based in a market. They don't have an Ontario wide or a CHL wide broadcaster. You get that when Sportsnet starts picking up the games through the second part of the season. They have their games of the week, etc. But really what you're getting is coverage from a local feed, and that tends to color things a little bit. So I will use this as an opportunity to remind the league that I think there's real opportunity for growth in this department league wide when it comes to how the game is covered, even how it looks in terms of the coverage. I think there are some simple wins, and I'm happy to take, like, I'll help you with this, OHL, because I love you. And we've done some work on this over the years. We as a league, I say, and I'm not associated with the league, so I should be careful with the we here, but the league has done work on this over the years. And I think there's some real low hanging fruit that could be plucked to elevate the broadcast, generally speaking. And yeah, maybe a reminder to the play-by-play guys, particularly those who are on television, that their games are being picked up by the CHL network and thus heard elsewhere. But it's tough to separate yourself from the team that you're calling, that's for sure. And it's something pretty common. I'm guessing the game that Michael was watching was with his team on the road somewhere, so he got the other team's broadcast. And much like we talked about for some time earlier in this broadcast, Dan, we all bring our own passions and biases into the experience in this league. We want our team to win. We want to hear about our team. And if the broadcaster isn't giving enough attention to your team, you're going to feel it pretty personally.
For sure. Yeah. And even the emotion thing's tough, Mike, right? Because to get emotional about something, you have to be invested, and odds are you're going to be invested in the team that you follow the most or cover the most. So otherwise it can come across as pretty contrived or fake emotion. So there's all these dynamics at play, I think, when you're broadcasting that the casual viewer doesn't really notice. So yeah, I think the email makes a valid point in terms of let's try our best. Let's try and keep that in mind when we're doing it. But yeah, I think it's one of those professions that's always open to criticism, and it's going to take more than its fair share.
It is. And it's not unfair criticism, Michael. You're not alone in that. And hopefully this is a reminder to all of us who do the broadcasting, and I hold myself in that category, to do the very best job that we can. And remember that there are fans of the other team sometimes tuned in as well. Dan, this past week, Josh Brown with the Waterloo Region Record reported that the Kitchener Rangers and head coach Jussi Ahokas are beginning discussions around a contract extension. When I read the story in the paper, I thought, good job. I saw Josh later that day and I asked him about it. He said, well, he just had a note in his calendar that the 2 years plus a 2-year option. That's what was originally agreed to between Ahokas and the Kitchener Rangers. Was coming up in July. So we thought, well, we're getting to that time, and maybe there's something going on. And so both parties, the Kitchener Rangers and general manager Mike McKenzie and head coach Jussi Ahokas, have expressed interest in getting something done so that this relationship can continue for a little bit longer.
Yeah, Mike and Kitchener, this is a model we've seen before with the option years kind of being a placeholder, but that gets renegotiated depending on how the coach performs. We've seen that happen before. Obviously, with a coach like UC Hocus, there's going to be interest from the Rangers side in keeping him and extending him and making him happy, and maybe that requires a little bit of a bump up in pay for his subsequent years as they potentially look for that 2027 hosting duty of the Memorial Cup. Who knows? So yeah, it's great that there's mutual interest there, and the Rangers, like a lot of organizations, always say that there's always out clauses. If an NHL team comes along and says, we really want you, obviously they're not going to hold him back. And great news all around. The fan base would be thrilled to have him around. The only little kind of side note I put in there is the Rangers have an excellent bench staff, probably as strong a bench staff as I've seen in my time following the OHL. That's saying something. They've had some really good staffs. But with Jeff Krzakos and Brad Flynn, terrific bench staff there. So you never know how these things will impact. You'd like to see those gentlemen retained as well, and maybe a bump up in duties as well. But sometimes, Mike, when you have a really good staff, it's tough to retain all of them.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because as much as this becomes about the head coach, just like it becomes about the goalie or the quarterback or the captain or whatever, this is a staff that works well together. And I think we should, if you're a fan of the Kitchener Rangers, you would hope that this is something that the entire staff is being brought along with. To your point about the opportunity that might come along for a professional job in the National Hockey League, for example, and Josh Brown's article alluded to some exploration of that by UC Ahokas this past offseason. We know that this is a development league as much for coaches, officials, managers as it is for players. But this is one of the real challenges, Dan, when it comes to getting some sort of continuity and consistency within your organization, right? Long gone are the Brian Kilrays of the world. Stan Butler was around this league for a long time. George Burnett was around this league, is still around the league, but coaching for a long time, et cetera. But a lot of guys now kind of come through and use it as a stepping stone professionally to the next level of their career, and full marks to them for doing that. But even if you look back on the Pete DeBoer and Steve Spott era in Kitchener, Steve Spott was around longer. Obviously, he signed a 5-year deal after DeBoer left, but DeBoer was what, 9 years with the Rangers, and then Spott a little bit longer than that. I think 13 he topped out at. But even that seems like a long time now for how quickly players, coaches, managers, officials move through this game.
Yeah, and it depends what stage you are, right? I mean, you've got a Dale Hunter when you've got an ownership stake and you've made your money, you've made your impact in hockey. You're not necessarily looking to go back to the NHL. And that's a different scenario for most of these guys. They're all looking to be at the top level of their profession, right? So they get an NHL shot, but even those, we know how fleeting those are, right? How you might get on the revolving door in the NHL and get 3 or 4 different jobs, but it's a situation where you got to get used to moving. You're hired to be fired, all those kind of things. So a junior hockey market can be a great spot to land, especially if you have some GM responsibilities like Jeff Krzakos has in Kitchener, where bump the pay up a little, but at the same time, it's a stable gig that you can sustain for a lot of years. So uh, it is tough to retain them, Mike, but you got to look for ways if you've got the good ones, and it looks like that's what Kitchener's trying to do at this point.
For sure. I still just think there's a bit of a shelf life, and I'll take it back to the previous conversation we had about broadcasting. And I know a lot of people use this league as a stepping stone to a professional job in sports as well. And sometimes, like, it takes a long time to maybe come to the realization that where you are is a pretty damn good place to be. And maybe, as much as you want to reach the top level, things are pretty high at the level that you're already at, if you will, but it's all a matter of perspective. And anyway, your point about Dale Hunter, I think, is an excellent one because one of the secrets to London's success, obviously, is that continuity behind the bench. And I'll remind you, last year, I think it was just last year, could have been 2 years back. I think last year when we were talking about the Rob Wilson extension in Peterborough, right? 8 years, 8 years for James Richmond in Brampton slash Mississauga. That kind of continuity is really important to build something around. So if you've got somebody that's willing to take that on, in terms of committing to the market, committing to the league for that long, I think that's a huge win for your organization. And just consider this. Take this into account as Pano Femis with the Erie Otters finishes off his overage season. In Femis's OHL career, he has had the following as coaches: Billy Burke, Jody Hull, Daniel Fitzgerald, Jeff Angelides, Ryan Kuwabara, BJ Adams, Wes Wolf and Vince Lays, Stan Butler, and now Wes Wolf and Ken Paroff. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different coaches, one player, 5 years in the league.
Yeah, that stability, Mike, is you talk about for building success in a franchise for sure, but we talked about a long time ago, even the recruiting aspect. If you're a parent looking to send your kid to a market, one of the things you're looking for is, well, who's my kid going to be playing for the next few years?
Sure.
So you're taking a leap of faith if it's a franchise that's constantly cycling through coaches. Well, is he going to have a miserable time? Are there going to be some duds in there? You have to put a lot of faith in that organization that they're going to find the right guy, so that if the one you're recruiting that's recruiting you leaves, that someone else as good or that's as supportive is still in place. And that doesn't always happen. So this stability really helps for franchises on a lot of levels.
Selfishly, because I've gotten to know this crew in Kitchener over the past couple of years, they've certainly changed the culture, implemented something that they believe in. They get along well. They're a fun group to be around. I hope the Rangers and Ahokas, Kerzakis, and Flynn can find a way to consummate this relationship a little bit further, because I think the Rangers as a team, as a franchise, are in very good hands right now from Joe Birch on down. So it's nice to see for the fans in Kitchener who, let's be honest, Dan, have been waiting since 2008 for a return to the promised land of an OHL championship.
Well, and let's just say this, Mike, as someone who's fairly tuned into the Ranger fan base, we both are, I would say, hear a lot from the fan base. This is the first time in a long time when it's pretty much universally positive about the coaching staff. And that says something, because it's really hard to get universally positive feedback from a fan base.
Now, if we could only get universally positive feedback on officiating crews, this league would be all set, right? All right. I feel like we have gone through the overtime and into a shootout. It might even be a 15-round shootout like we had in the Sioux a couple of weeks ago. We're making you put in some OT on this week's episode of the OHL podcast, but one more piece of business for us to still take care of, which of course is our prospects of the week. Dansky, who you got?
All right, I'll be quick because we're over time. I wanted to give a nod to Jacob Kluche and Saginaw, Mike. Every time I see the guy, he is stirring the drink there. He's bringing them into the fight. The nights when the team hasn't really been going, he's going. 3 2-goal games in his last dozen. Second round pick from 2023. Still a young kid. Doesn't have a ton of size, but uses every bit of what he has to full effect. So Jacob Kluche is my guy, Mike.
That's funny. Jacob Kluche was almost my guy too, Dan. I took a good long look at those same numbers, and we've already talked about how well Saginaw has been playing lately, but I decided to go to the Eastern Conference instead, and my eyes are on Jake O'Brien this week. A 9-game point streak, 4 goals, 13 assists in the past 9 games. Last year's Rookie of the Year has already doubled his goal total from a season ago, and he's on pace for 90-plus points this season. Guy can make plays, very creative. He plays all zones. 200-foot game is there. And coincidentally, the Bulldogs have won 13 of 15, and they've got points in 14 of those games. The most recent game was an overtime loss in Windsor. So Jake O'Brien gets my nod as the prospect of the week.
Yeah, Jake O'Brien, Mike, looked really good and junior Canadian sweaters in his U16 year. And I just want to say the Montreal Canadiens have 2 first-round picks, and you look good in those colors, Jake. I'm just saying.
Shut up, Mahar. Honestly, if that's not as good a
Uh,
note as any. That NHL team makes me want to. I won't even say because this is on the record, and then people will call the Humane Society. But I've got this little saying that I use away from recorded sessions about. Anyway, I'm a dog person, not a cat person. I'll leave it right there. You can think of the awful things I would consider doing to animals I like less than dogs when I hear the name of that team from Montreal. I can't stand them.
don't make it personal, Mike. Don't make it personal.
Thank you, Dan. I will not. Except against you. I'm allowed to make it personal against you, you chump. You and I have known each other for far too long. Okay, really looking forward to getting back to building this league in your ears and eyes. We want you to tell a friend. We want you to be invested in this league. We want you to know what's going on. We will continue to tell those stories and share those thoughts and observations on what we see and hear around the league. Really glad that you are here to be a part of it. That guy over there is Dan Mahar on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm Mike Farwell at Farwell_OHL. This is the OHL podcast.